everybody. Welcome to another terrible podcast by comics. I'm Eerie Diamond, your hostess. Nice to meet you all, or see you all, or glad you all are here. One of those. Okay, let's meet our guests, shall we? Loyd, would you like to go first? Introduce yourself. Hi, Denise.
Sure. I'm Loyd Auerbach. I'm a parapsychologist, author, speaker, instructor, teach parapsychology classes for the Rhine Education Center, part of the Rhine Research Center, where I'm also on the board of directors. I am the director of a group called the Office of Paranormal Investigations, which ends up getting all my students who take my classes coming into it. And I'm president of the Forever Family Foundation, which is a nonprofit that works with spirit mediums in the family grieving process, and also supports the work of researchers doing scientific research on life after death. There's a bunch of other stuff. I'm also a professional mentalist, known as Professor Paranormal.
Wow.
That's the nutshell.
Darn, I forgot my spoon.
I know, right? We're not doing spoons today, so it's fine. This is Denise. She is my unofficial co-host, so she is a huge fan of the show. Yes, last time I had Loyd on, we talked about bending spoons, and at the end of the show, we all tried to do it. I did it because I'm really good at it now, thanks to
You're
Loyd.
also good at unbending, aren't you?
Oh, yes. That was another thing that happened. I went to one of his classes where everybody learned how to bend spoons. And at the end of the class, I felt terrible because we had bent all these spoons. These spoons were not useful. I felt bad for the spoons because they no longer had a purpose. And so I unbent them all for him and gave them to him. He could
First and only person to ever do that.
He couldn't figure out what the hell I was doing.
Yeah.
Why are you doing this? I'm like, with spoons, their whole purpose, you've got to help them with I don't know. I know it's weird. I don't know why I felt bad for the spoons, but that's just me.
It was good. It was good.
Ankhasha, could you please introduce yourself and who you are and all about yourself?
Well, let's see. I am Ankhasha Amenti. I'm a psychic medium. I have worked actually with Loyd for many, many years in the Office of Paranormal Investigations. And I work also with Windbridge Research, which is a research institute out of Tucson, Arizona. And they study death, dying, and what comes next. Wow. So I have a private practice up in Washington State. I do a lot of my work, of course, over the phone, and really enjoy that. My main purpose is alleviating grief with people through mediumship contact, connecting them to people who they've lost.
Wow.
And Ankhasha and I have done a couple workshops together too. We've known each other quite some time.
That's right.
Wow. So that's great. So you help people kind of close that gap on when they've lost someone they love. And
yes, I try and give them evidential information. That's really my purpose, is to give them evidence from their loved ones that show that I'm in contact with them, things that I find out about them through the person on the other side who talks to me, and then makes connection with the person who's in front of me or on the phone with me to assure them that their loved ones are still around them. That's my purpose.
So you have a, I know I'm not going on the agenda. I just want to talk to you for a second. So you have a, you have a, I don't know what you would call it, a spirit or a person or that's on the other side that helps kind of connect you, kind of opens the door for you. Is that what you were saying? Or
No, I don't really have some people work with a spirit contact on the other side, a guide who opens that channel for them. I do have my own spirit guides, but they don't really do that type of work for me. I ask for the person of the loved one that I'm going to be reading for to come and make connection with me. And that's how they make it directly with me.
Wow. That's fantastic. Wow. Okay, we'll go back. A little bit about you. Tell us any other things you want to tell us about yourself? How long you've been doing this work, or you know?
Well, I've been doing this work. I've had these experiences and then started as a really small child and then started studying when about the age of 10 or 11, I started getting involved in some things that I started getting involved in the occult because that's kind of what was out there at that time in the 60s. And I found that, I had a tremendous interest in it. Really, the thing that brought me to that was the TV series Dark Shadows. I
Oh.
thought,
Me too.
right. Lloyd and I kind of bonded on that,
Yes.
and some other things too, like comics. But that was something that intrigued me, and I got involved in that. And then because I had a very strong pull to help people, I ended up joining the ministry at age 18, and I was in that for 12 years. Went to a very fundamentalist church and married a minister and spent 12 years of my life helping people, but it did kind of squash my gifts and my abilities, and they didn't quite accept that. That was not something that they pretty much frowned upon it. I became a little bit of an outcast there. So I did eventually have to leave in order to continue to follow the work that I do.
Wow. Wow, what a story. That is, wow. Your life has been very interesting. I love that. Oh my God.
And that's the abridged version too.
I can just imagine. Oh my God. So why do you do this is the next question. I don't know. Loyd, do you want to tell us why do you do this?
Well, I was actually interested in the subject before even Dark Shadows, although Dark Shadows pointed me in the right direction to find the books by parapsychologists, which was a good thing. It was a few reasons I was interested. One was I was a little science geek, and I couldn't figure out why science wasn't looking at the question of people's psychic abilities. It wasn't even about ghosts or anything like that. It was to me that it made sense, maybe because I grew up reading comic books and a lot of science fiction, which normalized these abilities, unless they were in superheroes or something. So I felt like there was no reason why people couldn't have these abilities. And when I started reading the research in parapsychology, that was kind of confirmation of that. So to me, that there is the question of why isn't science doing it? It's important. It's a major question about us as human beings. It's what makes us human. And that is why I'm so interested in this. We have potential that has not been explored or accepted in our culture. And I think it should be.
Wow. Wow. Same question. Tell me, why do you do this? I know you felt a pull.
Right. I felt a pull to serve people and to help people. And I felt that the best way I could do that was to make connections with their loved ones on the other side and help them know that their spirit continues on, because I have always had a strong belief in that and a sense of that. But I really didn't have the training that I needed in any type of parapsychology. So when I met Loyd, I started exploring a lot of books, but I needed direction. And then I ended up moving back. I lived in Boston for a while, and I moved back to California. And in the back of one of my books, there was a reference to Loyd Auerbach. And I said, well, wait a minute, this is really close to where I live. So I contacted him and I said, are you training, teaching, doing anything? And he told me about a session that he was having within a few weeks. And I registered for it, went, and it was very exciting to be able to be among a lot of people that were interested in the same thing. And then Loyd and I hit it off. He asked what I did. I told him, and he said, well, okay. And some things went from there.
But it was because we bonded over comic books, though. I think that was the first thing that happened. So
Absolutely.
So, super dorks. No, but in a good way. I'm married to a dork, so it's fine. I did that because he's behind me. You can hear him laughing. He's over there. Yeah, we won't even talk about that. I make fun, and then he's like, yeah, but you married one. One's a choice. I just grew up a dork, so whatever. That's not his voice, but that's how it sounds in my head. So, but you had this from you when you were a child, right? Where you,
Right.
yeah, where you had. That's so insane. I love that. I just want to sit with you and talk for like so long. Okay, but here we go. So one thing I do want to talk about a little bit, just very quickly, you actually are certified. Like you went through some stuff, almost like tests. And you've been certified by, I wrote it down, the Windbridge Research Center. And I'm really curious about what kind of tests they put you through, because I read that on your bio, and I gotta know.
Sure. Well, the tests are actually outlined on windbridge.org, which I point people to because it's a very detailed program. But there were 8 specific tests. They had to do with, of course, personality tests, psychological tests, interviews with the scientists that created Windbridge, and then they became blinded readings. And what I mean by that is they were readings where the researcher had no idea who I was reading for. They had people who had lost someone who were designated as sitters. I would make contact with the scientist over the phone. The sitter would not necessarily be there. And then I would give a reading about the departed loved one who would make contact with me. Then the sitters had to score those. And the details of how that was done it's very extensive within Windbridge, which people can certainly read about, and I'd suggest people do. But then those things were scored, and they went through quite a few people to find mediums that scored obviously much higher than chance and didn't use any kind of means because to find out anything about the person, because we didn't know anything about the person who we were reading for. The interviewer, the scientist who was working with us, didn't know anything. So there was no possibility of us even reading the minds, which would be pretty fantastic anyway, but we couldn't possibly read the minds of the scientist or the interviewer that was doing the interview with us. We were just told, we were given a time, and we were told, go ahead and begin, make contact, begin, and that's what we did.
And I'll mention, let me mention that it was an extensive process. I mean, the researchers, Julie Beischel especially, who's the founder of Windbridge, is an incredibly careful researcher, doing controls so that, one, we can exclude any possibility of information leakage through the normal senses or logical inference, that kind of thing. And two, she was trying to make sure that those controls eliminated at least the general possibility that Ankhasha or the other mediums were actually reading the mind of the person, the researcher. The sitters actually were told the time the reading was going to be happening, but had no connection with either the researcher doing the interviewing or the medium, and was told also to think of a relative and have that relative contact the medium, not even knowing who the medium was. So it was like pulling it back so that there had to be some psychic process going on, whether it was a spirit with a spirit or someone else. But there's definitely a psychic process. There's no way to get around that in the way this is done. I think it took a year for that process for testing, right, Ankhasha?
Yes.
Yeah, and Julie was Beischel was looking for 20 mediums who would be going forward available for actual research studies, rather than having to wonder, okay, is this new medium any good or not? Mm-hmm. So working with people who are volunteering their time, it's all volunteer. This is an important thing that people ought to know, that the mediums aren't getting paid for this.
Wow.
And not that the Windbridge Research Center has money to pay them, but because there's not a lot of funding in parapsychology as it happens.
What? Just kidding.
No. Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of academic prejudice against the subject, especially that's been exacerbated by the skeptics organizations in the last 40, 50 years. And on top of that, a few of the foundations that were funding more extensively way back when, the foundation boards changed and the boards didn't want to fund that stuff anymore. So it's a very difficult thing. Organizations rely on donations. There are usually grants for some research projects, but organizations like the Woodbridge Research Center, the Rhine Research Center, rely heavily on either memberships or donations in general. And they're both tax deductible organizations. So we hope that when people die or in their will, that they'll put one of the two or one of the many organizations in their will as well.
It's so funny. Yeah, it's one of the things you don't think about, but clearly,
Yeah. I've suggested that if we only had every psychic who does readings in the US give $5 a year, the field would be overly well funded, given the number of psychics and mediums out there. That's all it would take. It's just a crazy little tiny amount, but unfortunately, too many psychics and mediums are not interested in science at all.
Wow. That's, oh my God. Okay. Yes, you've said it all. Normally I'm so full of questions, but you guys are like, I'm overwhelmed by how cool you
We know your questions before you ask them.
I know. You're just so cool. Okay, how does a parapsychologist, like I said, I know we all saw Ghostbusters. Remember, even their thing got cut. Remember, from the college? It was so sad. But
Right.
I know you're a huge Ghostbusters fan.
Oh yeah, and I'm just waiting for that next movie in November. I can't wait.
And if you didn't think that he was a huge Ghostbusters fan, right behind him is a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. So obviously,
and a couple of the characters on the wall too, action figures.
So if you were wondering, yes, and I'm sure that when that movie came out, everyone was like, "Oh my God, dude!" And you were like, "Yeah, I know." Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm a dork. Hi. So how does a parapsychologist work with a psychic medium? Tell us your process.
In many respects, when we do an investigation, we're interviewing witnesses to get their information, what's been happening to them, talking about the individual experiences, looking at the location where that makes sense. And then the whole idea of these ghost hunting shows, they focus on the technology that honestly doesn't do what most of the manufacturers says it does. Some of it is really good for environmental checks. And when we use that stuff, we're trying to figure out what's going on in the environment when a person is having an experience. So what a psychic or medium can do is a couple things in a couple areas. One, the practitioner actually becomes our best tool. As Ankhasha knows, someone we both used to work with, my late friend Annette Martin, whenever she and I were doing something for TV and I was asked what's my favorite piece of equipment, Annette would jump in front of me and just kind of say, "I am," and she was. And Ankhasha provide information, so it's information we can get that adds to what the witnesses have and supports what the witnesses have experienced. Often I have found with Ankhasha and others I've worked with that they can pick up things that have nothing to do with what people are reporting as ghosts or as things, because they're coming up with the real explanation, which is not necessarily even psychic. So they're psychically looking at the environment, which is often very helpful. And then if there is, let's say, a ghost there, there's a communication process. And I can talk all I want, but I'm not hearing back from the ghosts. So it's really helpful to have someone who's a communicator who can be that intermediary, which is where we get the word medium, the intermediary for that.
Nice. So I do want to ask you very quickly, what kind of instruments do you, if you use instruments, what sort of things do you use?
Well, and none of them work consistently well. So just to say that, so we use EMF, electromagnetic field detectors for magnetic fields and electromagnetic fields, sometimes electrostatic or static electricity detectors. They work in some kinds of cases and not always, and they're not consistent. If people are reporting temperature changes, then we'll use thermometers and similar type devices. But mostly it's, a camera or video camera and audio recorder, not to communicate with ghosts or catch ghosts. It's really to document what's actually going on as we look around. I mean, in some cases I've used actually a protractor and a ruler and a carpenter's level, determining that what people were experiencing was not paranormal at all, but problems with the structure of the house.
Oh my God.
So, and I can honestly say that with my EMF detector, I found more bad wiring than I found anything paranormal. So.
Oh yeah, if you drop a ball in our dining room, it will roll around because our house is very uneven. Ankhasha, so tell us kind of what's your process? What's your, when you go in, kind of how do you get, into it? Just a little bit about that. Let's say you're entering an investigation with Loyd. Yeah.
Well, I like to go in. Sometimes it's good to have an idea of what the team is looking for. Because if they, if what they have reported so far. Other times it's fine for me not to know anything and to just give my impressions. That's sometimes my preference, is to not know anything about the case itself, just where the location is. And I don't even mind just not knowing until I get there too. I don't need to know anything about where we're going. But I go in first and I just kind of get a general sense of the house or the office location, wherever it is. And then I see if I can pick up anything about the living occupants of the house, if there are any. If the house is empty, about the occupants who were there previous. And if there's any other energies that are there that want to speak to me, or if I'm getting imprints of things.
So how does it come to you? Is it in your head? Or is it, I mean, I'm just curious. Is it voices? Is it visions? Is it all of that? Like, I'm just very curious.
It's all of that. Typically with me, I use my hands a lot. I don't necessarily touch the house or the building that I'm in, but I like to move through it because I feel like there are times where I can feel the energies through my hands. That's just something that I've always felt. And then I go and I tend to hear a lot. That's just the way that my particular ability works. I hear the voices a lot. And then as I start to get more comfortable with what I'm hearing and I can understand them clearly, then there are times where little flashes come into my head of what they might look like, things that are said. And I know I feel pulls to certain areas of the house. I definitely feel those. Or I'll go to a location on the property because I can feel pulled to that. I become a little bit unfocused during that time because I like to, I feel very comfortable usually with the team I'm working with Loyd. I know he only has people around him that are going to be trained in investigation. People aren't running around screaming and falling on the floor or, jumping every time something happens. That's really sad that is all that gets shown a lot of times, but it's important. It's important to be able to go in there and really experience the energy of the house. And then I try and report definitely to the lead investigator.
Nice. I do want to say really quick, I love when I watch ghost investigation shows and they're like, they scream and then run out. I'm like, dude, that's what we're looking for. Why are you screaming and running out? Like, what
it's so ridiculous. It just
clearly you knew there was going to be a loud somebody. You said, give me a sign, and someone put a loud sound and then they ran. Ah! I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like,
Exactly.
Oh my God.
It's, you know, and if they're that terrified, why in the world are they doing it?
Why are you
begin
doing
with?
Okay,
Right.
so this brings me to something I wanted to talk to you guys about. The USS Hornet. So
Yeah.
I've been on this ship.
Mhm.
And and that exact thing happened. Somebody like heard a sound, freaked the fuck out, and was like, ah! And I'm like, why else are you here? You're not here to look at the ship. We're on like a midnight flashlight tour. Clearly, we're here for ghosts. You're here to get scared, guys. Like, come on. And then they were like, oh God. And then it was hilarious. Loyd, I know you've investigated. Both of you have gone on
Yeah.
an investigation there
And
together.
I mean, I did the initial, I and my folks did the initial investigations in '99, which is about a year after they opened as a museum. I was brought in by a psychic who was actually working with working as a volunteer aboard the ship, and had been asked to look into it by the foundation board. And she actually had a significant background in data analysis in science. I mean, she actually worked for Genentech for
Wow.
20 years. So she had a real grounding in scientific process. She brought me in. We did significant investigation. The thing about the Hornet, you know, when somebody says they hear a sound in these flashlight things, that ship makes noise. It's steel. And the changing temperature causes shifting. It's like your house settling to the max.
Mhm.
And I've been with people who freak out when they hear a noise. It's like, that's just the sound of the steel. It has nothing to do with anything apparitional. The thing that was really interesting, we spent quite a long time doing interviews with a couple dozen witnesses, people there are some guys who lived aboard the ship as volunteers. There are docents, people who were working in the foundation board. So, and then since that time, we've done other interviews as well. And then I had Stosh Murray, who was the psychic at the time, and I brought in some others that was prior to knowing Ankhasha. And we got significantly good information from multiple people that dovetailed with each other. In fact, there were a number of multiple witness sightings of the same person, of the same sailor or officer or multiple officers. So it was very, very consistent and very much positive. Actually, there was no one there who felt they were having a negative experience on the ship. With the spirits. In fact, it seemed like based on descriptions, there might have been over 50 different guys there, spirits there. So when I worked with Annette Martin first, and then when I got to know Ankhasha, she came aboard the ship with us as well. And she did her bits of communication and picking up on things.
Oh, okay. Ankhasha, tell me what I have a theory about the Hornet, and I want to know tell me what when you were there, what were you picking up? What were you?
Well, that was one of the first things I think that I did with Loyd, I believe. And
Yeah.
he really didn't tell me much about it. We went on and we just started walking through, and he took me through, but he didn't say, okay, something happened here or anything like that. He was very like, okay, we're going to go here. And we'd walk one place. Tell me if you get anything. And there were things I was getting. I got some things about a chaplain counseling a young man. All of a sudden, up on a catwalk, I saw a man in whites, a military man, a Navy man in whites, and then I saw a man in khakis, and told him about that. And then when we were finished, I said, you know, this is just a really good feeling. I think they want to be here. It felt like they were happy being there. And we got out to the car, and he opened, I don't know if you remember this, Loyd, you opened an envelope and you had everything detailed in there from all of do you recall that?
Yeah.
And he had everything detailed of where everyone had been seen and everything. And he went down the list with me, telling me about those things. So it was fascinating, but I do feel that the ship is a very happy place. That I believe that the men who serve there love the Hornet and want to be there and want to protect the ship and bring it back to life, or you know, they're happy.
So I should mention.
Theory.
Okay, before you do that, let me just tell you a couple of things here. In 1995, until 1995, from the time that the ship was decommissioned in 1970 to 1995, it was in a couple of different shipyards, mainly in the Bremerton shipyards up in Washington State. It was slated to be scrapped for $6 a ton. Now, this is the ship that was the lead ship in the Pacific Fleet from 1943 to the end of World War II. And it also is the ship where Apollo 11 and 12 astronauts were recovered. All right, so very important historically. In 95 was brought down to Alameda Air Base for the closure ceremony for the base, because that had been the port, the station for the ship in the Bay Area during World War II and afterwards as well. And fortunately, a foundation formed rather quickly to try to rescue the ship, and made a deal with the Navy to fix up the ship to make it a museum. But it was a rough few years of a lot of cleaning and repainting and other things, and there were money issues, and there were fights between folks who were on the foundation board. So they finally were able to open as a museum, but it still was, there's still a possibility it might get scrapped at that point. So the people who were working on the ship, the guys who were volunteering and cleaning and painting and all of that, started seeing these apparitions, these ghosts. And everybody got this really positive feeling about the ship, that they were there to make sure the ship did have a place in history, was protected. All of that was going on. And in fact, I talked to a guy who worked at the Bremerton shipyards on a radio show. I was on a radio show, I was on Coast to Coast. The guy called in telling him, saying that ship was not haunted. My dad and I worked aboard that ship doing maintenance for years. It was not. So I'm thinking the guy's like a skeptic, right? But then he says, the Oriskany, the sister ship, which is still here, that's incredibly haunted. So he was not a skeptic. So we have an idea that the ship was not haunted until it was brought down to the ship from the shipyards when it needed help.
My theory, I was on there. I'm on there, and I'm like, and for some reason, I grew up in a haunted house, whatever. My mom's a ICU trauma nurse, so like, I would constantly see shit in my house. It was scary because we were kids, but here's the thing: we're walking through there, and I'm like, yeah, someone's probably over there. You know what I mean? You just get that feeling like somebody's standing somewhere. And I was like, they're not. I felt like they were not living there, but coming there so that us ghost people that show up and want to have a little ghost thing to keep the ship going. That was like an impression that I had in my head. I was like, they're like, oh, it's your turn, man. Go in there, move stuff around, make a noise, do some flashlight shit. And like, that was honestly in my head. Like, I think they're just here doing their duty. So all us stupid ghost people who are all excited can come in and have a good time. And they're like, all right, I'm out. Tag you in, Jeff. You know what I mean? Like, that is honestly the impression I got. And it was really funny because everyone else was like, oh, it's terribly haunted. I'm like, no, I don't feel like that. I feel like everyone's just kicking it here. Like, this is when I go to work, it's like the water cooler. I don't know. That I'm just saying.
No, I think you really hit the nail on the head. That seems to be what's going on. And that's what many of the docents who've had experiences feel as well. And, they've asked for cooperation here and there. It's an interesting place because it just has that feel. If you really just let yourself open a little bit, you get the sense that these guys there's a chain of command. I mean, they're all Navy. Dead Navy, but they're still Navy. And there is a chain of command. I mean, there's the Rear Admiral Jocko Clark, who died in civilian life well after the ship was decommissioned. He's one of the people that was identified. The chaplain from the 40s was identified. Only a couple people have actually been identified because the ship complement was like 3,000 plus each time. So trying to figure out who's there would require a bunch of mediums going aboard and trying to have conversations to get that information. That hasn't happened yet. So
right. So when you were there, were you I realize I'm looking at you both as if you don't know where you are on the screen. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. Did you have any conversations with can you bring out somebody that you maybe had a conversation with on the ship, or I'm just curious.
You know, the first time I went on, I really didn't have a conversation with anyone. I just watched people, but I could tell that they were spirits of real people there that were walking back and forth. They weren't some kind of a repetition, right? They weren't haunting per se. You know, they weren't some repetitive image. But then the second time that we went on was interesting because I felt like the young man that was being helped by the chaplain, I was picking up things directly from him while I was watching him, and how very sad he was.
Wow. And do you ever feel like you're kind of bringing some kind of comfort to them because you can hear them? Or, you know what I mean? Like, is there that kind of thing? I'm just curious.
I feel that that they feel that way when they can make a connection with me, is because they're there, and it's just like spirits are all around us. There's no they're here all the time. And if we really think about it, that it's like they're trying to call, they're making a phone call and nobody's picking up the line. So sometimes people get little flashes, or they get a little image, or something happens, but they'll tell us, or they'll call me and say, you know, this happened, or I saw a spirit in my house. And I'll say, well, did you ask it what it was doing there? Or did you ask its name? Did you ask, oh, no, I didn't want to talk to it. I'm thinking, well, sometimes they really just want to make a connection. They just want to say hello, or they're just walking through. They're not there to do anything bad. It's really terrible that some of our television shows and most of them, make it out to be some evil force that's trying to harm people.
Yeah, when you die, you don't suddenly turn evil.
Right.
You know, of course, if you were an ass when you were alive, you're still going to be that after death. So there is that.
Yeah.
There's that.
No, yes, yeah. And you know, science tells us that no energy is lost. So why would your body die? And then
well, you know, and that's a real kind of oversimplification. Energy is not lost, but it's transformed. It's often transformed. So, and it's just that's an important consideration always, is that what is it transformed into, and what is that energy to begin with? And we're talking about consciousness. We're talking about our minds. You want to call it spirit or soul, whatever else. We don't even have a good idea what it's like, what it is in the body, let alone after death. So there's one of the biggest questions in science across many sciences is, what is consciousness? And there's no agreement right now. There's no good definition. So we're trying to look at consciousness when it's by itself, without the body there at all. It's helpful if we can get cooperation. We don't always get cooperation because it's kind of hard to tie somebody who doesn't have a body down to a schedule.
Really?
Yeah. They don't seem to have a body clock. They don't keep track of time the same way. Yeah. And I don't know that they have. I think the guys in the Hornet, they have a purpose, yeah. And I think you hit on one of the purposes they have. I know that they've interacted with some of the docents. One of the docents actually told me that every once in a while he will take a tour group during the day. He'll take a group through the ship, and he will occasionally see things. And because they're not limited to just doing stuff at night, nor are they limited to doing things in the dark. That's a kind of a bit of pop culture folklore. But I heard from one of them that on occasion, apparently some of the other docents experience this as well. They'll go to one of the conference rooms that was used by the admiral or the commander, the captain of the ship, and he'll open the door to the compartment, and he sees a bunch of naval guys sitting there who all then turn and look at him and then give him a glare like, dude, we're having a meeting. And he'll close the door, and nobody else sees the figures. You know, maybe one person once in a while will see them, but this is one of the docents who's had many experiences. So that's kind of the most negative thing that happens on the ship.
Right. Yeah, I saw like a shadow. I know somebody else who's seen a shadow. Actually scared the hell out of him.
Of course.
Uh, yeah. One of our viewers wants to know, what do you think would have happened to the ghosts on the ship if it had been scrapped?
We actually don't think too many of them, if any of them, were there on the ship in Bremerton.
Yeah.
It's because things did not even start until a few months after the ship was moved down and they started working on it. And all the psychics and mediums have gotten the message that we came to the ship because we served on the ship during when it was when it was actually in service, or they may have served on another ship in World War II and they came to the ship because of its importance in history. And they came to the ship with a purpose to make sure that ship doesn't get scrapped. So I don't really know, and especially I've talked to the maintenance guy up in Bremerton at the shipyards. I'm pretty sure that there probably wasn't anybody attached to the ship at that point at all. Or if they were, they would have gone somewhere else. Hopefully, moving on.
Well, family, yeah.
Right.
No, and I 100%, yeah, like I said, I'm so happy that I was right. I was right. Okay, anyway, this brings me to another thing. This is like such a stupid question, but I have to ask it. Loyd, have you ever seen a ghost?
No. I have actually heard a voice. In fact, Ankhasha was there with me at the Moss Beach Distillery when I heard my name, somebody saying hello to me. I have smelled smells associated with a spirit. I have felt things. In fact, I was on the Hornet with Popular Mechanics for Kids years ago. The kid host, we were in the galley area, and the kid host is going in the back area of the galley, and he comes running because he got freaked out because he saw somebody there who apparently waved at him. And I had to calm him down. He was freaking out so much. And as soon as he got calmed down, there's a camera guy behind me watching the kid's face. And I had a windbreaker on. I felt somebody pat me on the back, like, good going. And I turned to the camera guy. I said, hey, did my jacket move? And he said, no. So that was a really interesting experience. I've had a couple other similar types of experiences on the Hornet like that. And then at the Moss Beach Distillery, I have been walked through multiple times by the woman there. And that was actually seen after it had been going on for a while. It was seen by a couple of the psychics. A couple of the psychics were there.
Okay, let's talk about this investigation. I know that you were in, I keep doing it, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, were you?
I know, I don't know why I'm like, we're in the room together. Yes, I want to talk about that investigation a little bit. Would you like to kind of lead us off here?
Sure.
Not you, we've heard enough.
Ankhasha? Okay.
Oh.
Lead us off.
The Moss Beach Distillery. Well, let's see. The first time that I remember being in a class, actually, I think that was the first class I was in. Loyd said, everyone in the class is you're going to view a location. I'm not going to tell you what the location is. And I think you had envelopes.
Remote viewing.
Right, little remote viewing. And we did that, and I drew a hallway, an area going down with a stairway going down with photographs, with black and white photographs. That's what I remember. And I could be wrong on that, Loyd, but I remember doing that. And you said, when you opened it up, evidently it was the distillery, that they had something.
Yeah, like, they have at the bottom of the stairs is a hallway that has old photos of the restaurant.
It's in black and white, right?
Yeah.
So then I was very curious, and I had to go with you. And we went there one time. We've been there several times, but the one time we went, first time I remember seeing an image of a woman as she passed and feeling her very strongly. And I said hello to her because we knew her name at that time, Kate. And I said hello to her, and then I felt drawn to go out onto the balcony area, the patio
yeah.
that overlooks the ocean. It was beautiful. and stood there for a while. And then I felt like I was making communication with her, and you and I talked for a while. I don't remember a lot of what we said, but you asked me questions and Kate answered you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I mean, that was many years after I'd started doing an investigation there. The session actually I had with Ankhasha was really eye-opening in a few really interesting ways in that Ankhasha went into kind of an altered state and Kate did kind of speak through her, which had happened to Annette Martin previous to that as well. And so I was able to ask some questions, and there were some things that there's no way Ankhasha could have known, because I didn't always talk about everything we learned during these sessions with communication with Kate in the past with other psychics or with witnesses. And then we went in and we sat down for lunch. And when I had a session with Annette Martin back in 2004, we had like an evening communication session. And speaking of comedians, Mark Pitta was there actually in that session. And he asked some really funky questions, one of which had to do with sex. You know, do you miss sex when you were alive? When, you know, you ask a ghost, what did you miss most about being alive? And the answer was food and sex. So there were a couple other questions about that. So I thought about the food thing. And so Ankhasha agreed to go into that altered state at lunchtime. And Kate ostensibly dropped in and was eating through Ankhasha, tasting food for the first time through Ankhasha. And I have to tell you, it was an amazing thing just to watch what was going on with Ankhasha, because she was alternating between laughing and crying as she was eating. So that in itself was really powerful. And then you sort of came out of it and said Kate was going to do something special for me.
Yes.
Now, this is a few years after I had my walkthrough, where she walked through me multiple times.
Quick question. What does that feel like?
For me, it felt, well, first of all, Kate is kind of not goofy. She's bubbly. She's very bubbly. So it felt very good, like a real positive energy. But initially it felt like, you know, when you stand in the waves and the surf up to your knees, and the surf comes in, you start rocking a little bit. That's kind of what it felt like.
Okay.
With that. And I also, at that time when it actually happened, I got a picture in my head of what she looked like. I didn't see her the way you normally see, but I had a real clear mental image of her. But after that lunch, we were downstairs and I was interviewing Ankhasha about what she experienced during the session. And all of a sudden, by the way, this is a weekday. The place was relatively empty. At lunchtime, we were downstairs in the enclosed patio area. There was no one else downstairs with us. And we were at a back wall in a corner. Off to my left, I heard a very clear female voice with a giggle say, "Hi, Loyd." And Ankhasha looked up and said, "Did she say something?" Nothing was on the recorder, by the way. So nothing at all. So it was, because we look at this as being a psychic perception, you know, kind of like connecting to your mind, not an actual audio or acoustical sound. And so that's a little different. But that was a real interesting, really first good session with Ankhasha. That was different than others that I'd had with other psychics and mediums who I've been bringing in there since the very beginning of time, of the time that I started investigating in '91 with a Japanese medium, actually.
Okay, couple questions. First of all, where is this distillery at?
So the Moss Beach Distillery is a restaurant south of San Francisco. It's on the coast, right off of Highway 1, south of Pacifica.
Okay. Second question, who is Kate? Tell me her story.
So the story we have, which is really interesting because there's not really historical record here. This is a problem. There is recollection of old timers that a historian got when I interviewed the local historian in '91. She had gathered, she had done some interviews with some of the older residents who had been alive during Prohibition, which is when the place first opened. So it was a house in 1926. In 1927, it was bought by a restaurateur, Frank Torres, who opened it as a restaurant and speakeasy on the coast. The reports from people were driving up from Hollywood to San Francisco up Highway 1, and they'd stop at Frank's place for alcohol, illegal alcohol, of course. Supposedly the mayors of San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, and other towns, and police chiefs used to frequent the place. The place was never raided because all of these folks were there. So the story goes that this woman came from the Midwest, and she actually got a job as in the hotel. That there was a little hotel that was where the parking lot is now, that burned down in the 50s. But she got a job in the hotel, and she would come after work to the restaurant, and there was a piano player there, a young guy, and she started this thing with the piano player, which everybody knew about. She was known as the Blue Lady, apparently before she died. This is something we discovered much later. And that was because she always wore bright blue clothing at that point. She was there with this guy, and apparently one night she had left her husband, who was an abusive guy. And he showed up, according to the story, and tried to get to her, although the bouncers threw him out. Later that same night, apparently, she and the boyfriend were down on the beach below, taking a kind of an evening stroll. And what the next bit of information the historian got from the witnesses is that people found her with a knife in her back, and the boyfriend was unconscious. No idea whether it was no idea exactly what happened. Still don't know exactly what happened. Wow. With that. Now, there's some other conflicting information that came through some other psychics as well. The problem here is that I had someone who had a connection to the San Mateo County coroner, actually looked on her own. She she was a crime writer, and she looked into whether or not there was that murder had been committed, or there were records of that. But unfortunately, there were almost no records of the coastline or that part of the coastline and crime during Prohibition. Seemingly, according to one of the locals who had spoken to the historian, this was because it was Prohibition, and all the records, just ended up in the circular file being burned, so to speak. Wow. So yeah, so I was just going to say that after her death, people reported her walking up and down the beach, and then eventually into the restaurant and the hotel, both.
Wow. Ankhasha, did you get any of this when you were connecting with her at all? How she died at all?
Some of it. I think that prior to that, Annette had brought through a great deal of the information that was working. I would see her, feel her, and I felt her personality, of course, when I was
eating with
talking with her and eating it.
Happening. What was that like for you when that was happening, when you were eating for her, with her? I did kind of step out for a bit. I just really feel like when that happens, especially with her, I step out and I just let her experience what she wants to experience. So I don't remember a lot of it, but I know that Loyd keeps good records of that. And I've had other times where I've been able to let her speak and let her come through in that way. But it was an amazing experience, I can tell you that, because I felt very connected to her. Wow. So when that happens and you sort of step out, like you said, and somebody chronicles it, videotapes it, and you watch it, what is that like for you to see that? That you're kind of not there, but what is that like?
Well, I have seen that before on some other programs that I've done, a seance that I did up in Port Gamble. And I heard the recording from that. And that was fairly interesting because I was told by all the witnesses that everything about me kind of changed. I mean, they could physically see physical changes in my body and movements and the way I was holding myself and my face and everything. And I think it's fascinating that spirits can communicate that way, and that they can activate or energize a body in that way, as long as we're willing to be able to let that happen. I'm intrigued by it. I feel very good about it. And I enjoy doing that process and try and explore it as often as I can.
Well, okay. So I have another question. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, we're not going by this. I just want to talk to you. So when was the first time you had an experience as a psychic medium?
Actually, I was very small. I was very young. I was between the ages of 3 and 4. And the only reason I know that is from the location that I was living in on Whidbey Island. And I was very small. I was with my mother at our home on Whidbey Island in a remote area at that time. We lived near a big forest. And I was always told, of course, do not go into the forest because there were hunters and there was a lot of danger there because we lived on the edge of the sound too. Our property was on the edge. So not to go out of our yard. But my mother fell down. She actually had a blood clot and she was, in a great deal of pain and needed help. We had no phone and I was trying desperately to get to someone. So I ran out and stepped into the forest, just feeling like that's where I needed to go. And there was a woman there, and I saw this woman dressed in this with this beautiful blonde hair and this beautiful gown, and I guess I thought she was a princess. I don't know, but I followed her, and we talked, and she and I talked, but we talked in our minds. She didn't talk to me with her mouth, and I could hear it though in my head. So she held my hand, we walked through the forest, and then we got to the other edge, and she pointed to a house. And I knew then to go run to that house. As I started to run, I turned around and looked at her, and she just waved like that, just as if it was that, and she dissolved in front of me. So I told the people, my mommy's hurt, my mommy's sick. They found out where my father was and got help for her. So from that point on, my parents knew there was something different. And they would tell people, we don't know how she got through the forest. We don't have any idea how this little girl got through that forest and got help for us. And I kept telling them, the lady in with the dress, the lady brought me through, the lady that talks to me here. So they either thought I had a real problem or there was something going on.
Wow. Did you ever figure out was that woman someone you knew or did you nothing?
I see her at different pivotal moments in my life. She comes through for me. And I know, and she talks to me in my mind the same way. So my belief is that she is my guide, that she was my spirit guide, if you will. People have said it was your guardian angel. And then there's another thought, and it's kind of interesting because I'm always interested in exploring alternative ideas, is that at some point, was she my future self
I was gonna
coming
say,
forward,
yeah.
coming back to help me? I don't know. I don't know.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I have another theory, which is, time is a construct.
Right.
Talk to your future self and talk to your past self. And
Right. Could have been.
and it's great. If you guys can talk to each other, you can help each other out. So I know it sounds dumb, but time is a construct. Deneen wants to know, is there a history of mediumship in your life at all? Do you know of other people in your family that maybe are also have the same gift, or is that something?
I know all the way back there is. I wouldn't say I have that proof of mediumship, but I know that one of my direct ancestors was burned at the stake in 1597 in Scotland. And that I know because I've traced that back, and there was always a family story of that. So I was able to go all the way back and find that. But a lot of people were burned at the stake that, weren't mediums or psychics. They just, people wanted their
People.
things.
Yeah. Most
Shot
people.
you.
Right. But I will say interestingly enough, my mother was not, she was, I think, somewhat frightened of it. My father was extremely supportive of it and he encouraged me. He didn't say, oh, you're a medium, here's what you do. Never, never that. But he taught me so much. My father was just an amazing person who taught me a great deal about intuition, listening to inner voice, and about the universe. And he gave me a multitude of lessons and supported me in that.
That is very cool. Um, okay, so we're rounding out the podcast. I do want to ask, one of the last things I want to ask Loyd, is there anything that you want us to know? Anything about what you do or anything that you want us to know? Dispel the weirdness, whatever you want to do.
Well, we have discussed this actually amongst our, with our colleagues and everything, and that is that the experiences people have, whether they are ghostly experiences or ESP experiences, they're actually, if you go with the numbers of people who have had these experiences, especially those that have included them multiple times, they're not paranormal at all. They're actually more common in people's lives than other kinds of experiences. But because of the way, because there's a lot of baggage, especially in popular culture, and also a lot of problems with certain sciences. Interestingly enough, the scientists or the social science that's most opposed to us are psychologists, which is a field that physicists say is not really a science. So, it's a really wacky world that we live in. One of the reasons that I've been teaching courses for so long is to try to get people to understand that this is normal stuff, that this is something we can either develop or pay attention to or acknowledge. It's part of our world. It's part of what makes us human. I'm actually teaching a course starting tomorrow night, which people can sign up for even throughout the week, called How to Choose a Psychic or Medium and Assess a Psychic Reading. We're teaching that through the Ryan Education Center. And it's a fun class for me to teach. I even talk about psychic fraud because it's important to have that consumer information that's there. So that's a kind of an offbeat class from the normal classes I teach, which are how to do investigations, how to develop your psychic ability, what the science actually is behind this. We have a lot of really great online courses. If people are interested in remote viewing, for example, Paul Smith, who was one of the government remote viewers, is teaching a 4-week class starting this week on how to learn how to do remote viewing. So there's some good stuff there. And it's
can you quickly just explain really quickly what is remote viewing?
Remote viewing is a specific application of ESP, of real-time or precognitive ESP, where you are trying to gather information, in this case, about a location or about an event that is not within your general area. That's why it's remote. Technically, if you are trying to figure out what's in an envelope that you're holding up, there's nothing remote about that. Maybe you're viewing it, but it ain't remote. So, and people often misuse that phrase. It's a form of clairvoyance. It's of real-time ESP or precognition of knowing what's going to happen next or being aware of a distant location. So it's a really cool thing, and people can do it. I mean, not everybody has the aptitude for doing it well, but most people can do it to some extent. It's one of the most repeatable types of phenomena and experiments we have. And it's also one of the ones that is being applied across many different professions right now. There are remote viewers who are doing work in the corporate world, a little bit in the scientific world, for applications in the economic world, the world of money. So it's being used. I mean, it's actually being used. So
really,
yeah.
Okay, just now my mind got blown. That's really. Oh wow.
We need that for another show, Eerie.
Oh my God, dude, my mind just got blown. That used for that's okay. Ankhasha, anything you want us to all know?
Well, I want people to know that mediums are people too, that we have real lives, and we feel real loss too. we have many of the mediums that I know have gone through many different circumstances in their life of loss. So I understand what it is to lose someone, and I consider it not just a calling, but it's also a great honor to be able to connect people to their loved ones. And a good mediumship reading should make connections and give assurance that your loved one is there waiting for you, and that your relationship may have changed. It may have changed from one of a physical relationship to one now of a spiritual relationship, but a medium should help you to kind of bridge that gap too, so that you can see that they're okay on the other side and that you'll be okay too.
And I'll mention that there have been clinical studies showing that mediums can provide grief relief.
Yes.
Now, there's a small segment where that doesn't work, because then they get so, there's a whole different issue for psychologically for a small segment of the population. But for most people, even those who didn't believe in this stuff, there's grief relief. And again, there are clinical studies that have shown this.
No, I'm assuming you're talking about the Winchester Mystery House lady who was like just obsessed, and then she just, yeah, you know what I mean? When
well, there are people, yeah, there are people who get obsessed with, yeah, that's it, yeah.
Trying to be part
of, unfortunately, and those people often get taken advantage of by frauds very easily. But that's part of the problem. So.
And on that really quickly, Ankhasha, do you deal with that a little bit? Have people called you a fraud, or have you run across people that are frauds? It must be very upsetting.
I've certainly run across plenty of frauds, unfortunately. I think, and I've talked about this before, is that people, I think there are some very well-meaning people who believe that they're mediums because they have a mediumship experience. They have a connection. They have an experience. They see something, they hear something, or they have a connection with their loved one on the other side, and they somehow translate that into being a medium. But for the most part, I feel that most people who meet me are either one of two things. They're either very intrigued and they're very interested in what I do. They say, oh, that's great. Oh, I'd like to get a reading sometime. Or I know someone who got a reading from someone and this is what happened. And they're excited to meet me or interested in what I do and in mediumship. Then other people will say, oh, you're a medium. And have a little look on their face like you're either, you have a problem because you believe you're talking to dead people, or, right? They think that, so they're like, okay, never mind. Or they think you are someone who's preying on the grieving.
Right.
And I don't mind people saying, well, gee, I'm not quite sure how that works. I've never had that happen for me before. I don't mind that at all. But when people think that you're preying on the grief of others, that to me is a terribly strong judgment without even exploring what I do.
Yeah, and the problem there is that those same people would probably never think of that when they're talking to a hedge fund manager, right, or a stockbroker who already has a background of having taken money from people.
That is right. Amazing point you just said. And I'm sure you've had the same thing, Loyd, where, yeah, right? I'm sure you've had the same thing, Loyd, where it's like, you're just going into people's houses and being like, oh, yeah, there's some.
Well, yeah, I mean, mostly these days, I think what it is people, when I start talking about what I'm doing for investigations, they have them, if they've seen any of the shows, they have that mindset. But I mean, I can dispel that pretty quickly. I'm pretty good at that. And because I have a background as a magician, I can talk to a lot of the skeptics, provided that they are not true disbelievers. I mean, there's skeptical people, and then there are the true disbelievers who you could not change their mind, even if you were able to levitate in front of them. Right. I can levitate them, and it would still, they'd still say it's a trick, you know.
Yeah.
No.
Can I say something real fast? I just wanted to say, Loyd and Ankhasha, I just really appreciated the scientific aspect of that too. It just, that was so fascinating. And it just, no skepticism here with that, just, it's just, I see where you're going for like the mind and everything. So I just, accolades to both of you. That was really great. And
Thank you.
I see it as a real, you guys are real. You're the real deals.
They are the real deal. They are awesome people. And thank you guys so much. We're gonna do our outro. I really appreciate you guys. Again, I am Eerie Diamond. Ankhasha, thank you so much. And Loyd, thank you so much for being back on the show. We really appreciate you. Guys, this has been another terrible podcast by comics. I appreciate you guys all showing up. This has been, my mind is blown. I'm gonna go drink some gin and sit in the hot tub. Love you guys. Bye. Oh, wait, really quick. Ankhasha, where can people connect with you?
Oh, my website, ankhasha.com, is ANKHASHA.com.
Thank you. Where can people connect with you?
Well, my website actually is being worked on right now, so it's down. So actually Facebook, just look me up on Facebook or follow me as either at Loyd Auerbach or at Prof Paranormal on Twitter. And join me on Facebook every other Sunday at this time at 5:30 Pacific time, 8:30 Eastern time. Next Sunday, actually, I'll be doing a session called Ask Professor Paranormal on The Live Paranormal's Facebook page, facebook.com, The Live Paranormal.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Another great show, Eerie. Woo!